Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, it's evening time.
What a strange change of events.
It is, and it's reversed everything. It's turned us around.
I don't know which way is up.
I don't either, but hopefully we're headed the right direction.
I think we're facing the right way at least.
Good. What are we going to talk about now? We finished the Psalms. What are we going to do next?
We are going to just proceed straight ahead. So out of the Psalms into the Proverbs.
That sounds like an excellent idea.
I'm excited.
When should we start working on it?
Right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
we're gonna start working on that right now, and we're going to work on the Proverbs. Now, in general, what's a proverb? Well, Francis Bacon said, the genius, wit, and the spirit of a nation are discovered by their proverbs. And Lord John Russell said a proverb is one man's wit and all men's wisdom. Those things are true of proverbs in general. The one element that they don't have is the element of inspiration. Mm-hmm. The proverbs that we have in the Bible are not just one person's ideas, although they did come largely from one person, but what that one person had came from God. Mm-hmm. And so that one thing makes the book of Proverbs in the Bible different from other proverbs. The concept is the same, but they're not the same. We might mention that although we made a big deal of saying that there is a Psalm 1, Psalm 2, that it's okay to say Proverbs 1 and Proverbs 2, because each chapter, there are chapters in the book of Proverbs,
sure,
and each chapter contains numerous proverbs.
Many proverbs.
And so it is okay for someone to say Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1.
We might even find verses that have more than one proverb in them.
Exactly. They might even find, who knows what we'll find when we start looking at the Proverbs.
Right.
We'll start doing that one of these days, and then we'll discover lots of good stuff.
Right.
The first verse in the Proverbs describes the author of most of the book, and it says the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. It's a pretty specific description of who wrote it. And that agrees with what we find in 1 Kings chapter 4. In verses 29 through 34, it tells us that God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind, like the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal, and his fame was known in all the surrounding nations. And then this is the part that really affects us. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees from the cedar that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that grows on the wall. He spoke also of animals and birds and creeping things and fish. All men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Mm-hmm. And that describes what we have in the book of Proverbs, is the written version of all of that.
So did Solomon discover those proverbs, or did he make those proverbs up?
Yeah, that's a good question. Did he just take proverbs that existed within the Jewish culture and apply them? I don't know. The impression I get from that passage is that they were given to him by God, mm-hmm. and that they were something special. He didn't just take up folklore and apply it. That's what we do. We take a lot of statements from Benjamin Franklin or somebody else, and they make their way into our popular culture. But those things are just the generic type of proverb where you take the general people's wisdom and one person's wit to put them all together.
Sure.
And there's more work there in the Proverbs probably than just that. So mm-hmm. I don't know that we have the answer to your question, but that's my thought about that. There are a couple of proverbs that are probably written by somebody else. For sure, Proverbs 30 was written by Agur, the son of Jacob. It's identified that way. Then the last chapter in Proverbs is written by Lemuel. And there are some people who suggest that that's not a proper name, but a descriptive mm-hmm. term, because it literally means belonging to God. You see that word el, or the suffix el, which implies that it's related to God. Lemuel means belonging to God. So some suggest that maybe this is Solomon. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 24 and 25, it says that David comforted his wife Bathsheba and went into her and lay with her, and she gave birth to a son, and he named him Solomon. Now the Lord loved him and sent word through Nathan the prophet, and he named him Jedediah for the Lord's sake. And based on what you read in that verse, you notice that the word Jedediah means beloved of Jehovah. There are some people then that think that maybe that name Lemuel is just another way of saying Jedediah, but we don't know. There are some things in the chapter that might be consistent with Solomon writing it, and some things that may not be so consistent with him writing it. It doesn't detract from the value of that last chapter, because that's really an incredible chapter.
Sure.
And so we don't know exactly who wrote it, if that was an indication of Solomon or not.
We don't know who wrote it, but we do know the source.
We do know the source. We know who wrote it. We didn't know who put it on paper.
Right.
It was written. That's true of the whole Bible. We know who wrote it. Sometimes we're not sure who took a pen and put it on paper or parchment or whatever, but we know the original source.
Sure.
The core of the Proverbs, the reason of the Proverbs, are presented in the preface, in the beginning, in Proverbs chapter 1, the first 7 verses. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And that pretty well sums up all we need to know about the Proverbs, of why they're written and what they do for us, and who they won't benefit at all. We've done some research into different ways of looking at the Proverbs. One is to see how the different Proverbs are formed, because they're not formed the same way.
Right.
And so we've gone to different sources. One of them is to AmericanBible.org, where it lists some different kinds of Proverbs. And if you want to kind of go over some of those and explain different kinds of Proverbs.
And this kind of, in the way I think of this, is the way we did the Psalm study, where we looked at how Psalms are kind of categorized, and we take each type of, maybe the Messianic Psalms or the imprecatory Psalms, we kind of group those together and study those together. You can do a similar type of study with the Proverbs, where you look at Proverbs kind of on an individual level and see how they fit together with one another. Because as you just read through the book of Proverbs verse by verse, you might have 4 or 5 verses in a row that really don't talk about the same subject matter. They're all, of course, inspiration. They're all, of course, the Word of God, but it just kind of jumps around from subject to subject. And so if you begin kind of breaking them into pieces and rearranging the Proverbs, if you will, so that you get them grouped together, then we can kind of do the same type of study that we did with the Psalms. And so that's the hope here, is that we can discover some different categories, so that as we move through our study of the Proverbs, we have more of a coherent formula for looking at the message that's contained in the book. And
what we're going to look at right now is really more ways that we will be looking at those different categories as we go through them. Right. We won't use these as the categories. We will find we're going to have a different way of looking at them, but as we look at them, these are the things we'll be looking at. Right. And you're right that if you go through the Proverbs, you'll find the same thing in a lot of different places, maybe presented different ways.
Right.
It doesn't hurt us to hear things more than once, and it does not hurt us to hear them in different forms.
Absolutely.
And that appears to be what's happening in the book of Proverbs.
Absolutely. All right, so our first kind of proverb that we'll look at is the opposite parallel. Opposite parallel means the same statement or instruction is given twice, but it's given in opposite ways. So kind of a one way of looking at it, then a whole other perspective of how to look at it. So Proverbs 10:12 gives us, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all transgressions. Okay, so that's saying the same thing, but it's looking at it from two completely different perspectives. And then also Proverbs 11 verse 19, he who is steadfast in righteousness will attain to life, and he who pursues evil will bring about his own death. Again, there we have that opposite parallel statement. Another kind of proverb would be a similar parallel. The same statement or instruction is given twice in similar ways. The same idea is restated in different words. Sometimes the second line makes the point more strongly than the first line did. A couple of examples here. Proverbs 16 verse 17, the highway of the upright is to depart from evil, He who watches his way preserves his life. And then Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4, by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. And by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. So there we have those similar parallel statements, really giving us the same thing, but giving it in two different ways that kind of mirror each other. We have also proverbs that are just single statement proverbs. Some proverbs just give us a single statement describing some truth. These are often short, bold statements or simple warnings. Proverbs 14:12, there is a way which seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. And then Proverbs 17:28, even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is counted prudent. Didn't know if I should be the one that read that or not.
Yeah, we were gonna flip a coin or something and sort these out. That reminds me of the proverb that we have. It's better to keep your mouth shut and let people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and prove it.
Right. Yeah, and I was the one talking there, and you were the one silent. So I'm not sure what that gets us. Another type of proverb or kind of proverb that we would look at is a statement with an explanation. So the first line is a concrete image, which is then explained by the second line. Proverbs 20, verse 2, the terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. He who provokes him to anger forfeits his own life. So you can picture that growling lion. We've seen that in movies, or we've seen that at the zoo or whatever. You can picture it, and then you understand that a king is like that. And if you provoke him, you forfeit your own life. Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And again, there's a word picture. You can picture that those two pieces of iron sharpening one another, and then that's used to describe the relationship between two men. Another kind of proverb is a comparison. Some proverbs use striking images that compare one thing or person to another. These are called metaphors or possibly similes if they use like and as. So Proverbs 11:22, as a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion.
A very vivid picture.
Very descriptive. The spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all the innermost parts of his being. Again, a vivid word picture, the lamp of the Lord. You could see that lamp shining into the darkest places.
That's an image that's used quite a bit in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm. Especially in the book of John that we just got done studying, the light. Yeah. And then Proverbs 28, verse 15 is like a roaring lion and a rushing bear is a wicked ruler over a poor people. Very descriptive. And our next kind of proverb there is a descriptive list, usually 3 or 4 answers that follow a statement based on an unspoken question. Our example here is Proverbs 30, verses 18 and 19. It says, there are 3 things which are too wonderful for me, 4 which I do not understand. And when we have this structure, it's that 4th one that is being really pointed out to us. The 3 are the example, and the 4th one, this is the one that we're really supposed to focus on. There's another one, proverb that says, there's 6 things which the Lord hates, 7 which are abomination. It's that 7th one that we're really supposed to take note of in that list. So in this case, we're supposed to really pay attention to the 4th thing. The 3 things are the way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the middle of the sea, and then that 4th thing that we're really supposed to take note of is the way of a man with a maid. And so that's really the thing which are too wonderful, is really too wonderful to understand. I don't understand how an eagle flies, how a snake slithers on a rock. I don't know how to drive a boat in the middle of the sea. I sure can't explain a relationship between a man and a woman.
Don't ask me about that one.
Yeah. And then we have this kind of proverb, the if-then statement. And sometimes there's also an or else that comes along with it or is understood as a part of that. The second part explains the consequences of doing or not doing something. The or else is usually implied but not stated. Proverbs 13:22, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. Proverbs 14:6 says, a scoffer seeks wisdom and finds none, but knowledge is easy to him who has understanding. And then Proverbs 26:17, like one who takes a dog by the ears is he who passes by and meddles with strife not belonging to him. I think that might be the most descriptive if-then.
That's a very descriptive. If you want to go grab some dog by the ears, some dog that you don't even know, just grab him by the ears and
See how that fares.
See how that works.
Yeah.
And that's the same as sticking your nose in a problem that doesn't concern you.
Right.
We also looked at another place that described types of proverbs. And of course, there's no difference between a kind of a proverb or a type of proverb, but we're just using that to separate the different categories that we found. And it was found on a website by a man named Bob Yandian. And he lists 6 types of proverbs: synonymous, antithetical, synthetic, integral, parabolic, and comparative. In a synonymous proverb, both lines say the same thing, but they do it in a different way. And one example is Proverbs 11:25. A generous man will be prosperous, and he who waters will himself be watered. It says the same thing, but just a little bit differently. He who troubles his own house, in Proverbs 11:29, he who troubles his own house will inherit wind, and the foolish will be servant to the wise-hearted. Another type of proverb is antithetical, where you have opposites. And a thought is given in the first line, and the negative result is given in the second line. So you have something that's happened and then a negative result of that. In Proverbs 14:30, it says, a tranquil heart is life to the body, but passion is rottenness to the bones. So you have the positive statement, but then you have the negative if you don't do that. In Proverbs 17:22, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. The least common type of a proverb is synthetic, where each line teaches a different thought. At first glance, it appears that the 2 lines are saying something exactly the opposite or two totally different things, but they do have something in common. These are the proverbs that take a little bit more time to ponder, that we can look at and say, I really don't see the connection, and as you think about it, it starts to clarify just a little bit. One example of this uncommon type of proverb is Proverbs 10:18. He who conceals hatred has lying lips, and he who spreads slander is a fool. And so at first glance they may not appear to have anything to do with each other, but often slanderers are motivated by hatred, and what they're saying is a lie because they're just wanting to hurt somebody. So as you look at it and think about it, you start to see that there is some connection here, although at first glance it really doesn't seem to fit. Another type of proverb is integral, where the second line completes the thought of the first line. 4 examples of that: Proverbs 13:14, the teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, to turn aside from the snares of death. And Proverbs 19:20, listen to counsel and accept discipline, that you may be wise the rest of your days. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And then Proverbs 22:10, drive out the scoffer, and contention will go out. Even strife and dishonor will cease. And while we're here, we might go through that discussion we were having earlier about whether they're descriptive or prescriptive, whether the Proverbs are saying that if you do this, then that will happen, and that kind of discussion. So what were our thoughts along that line?
Well, the idea there is, do the Proverbs describe the way life is, or do they prescribe the way we're supposed to live so that we can get a desired result? And our answer was
yes,
kind of both.
Kind of both.
The Proverbs are descriptive of the way that life is so that we can know how best to live to get the desired results that we want.
Right.
Now, are they ironically, the phrase we would use, are they foolproof? Are they always going to give us the results that we want?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there is no absolute with the Proverbs a lot of times. The Proverbs 19:20 there, listen to counsel and accept discipline, that you may be wise the rest of your days. Well, we listen to counsel, we accept discipline. Does that mean we're never going to make a foolish decision? Does that mean we're never going to make a mistake in our understanding of the way that we should live? Probably not. We're going to make mistakes. But do we increase our chances, our odds of making wise decisions if we listen to counsel and accept discipline? And
I think that's the key point there. You mean there's no money-back guarantee with the Proverbs?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. But what it's saying is, if you want this result, this is the best way to achieve it. You're most likely to get the result if you do this.
Right.
And that's really the approach, is that you're maximizing the potential for you to, if you don't do it this way, you probably won't.
The Proverbs, another way that we talked about, the Proverbs describe the ideal. Here's the best scenario. You live this way, and here's how it turns out. But we live in a fallen world. We live in a world where other people have some say in whether our lives go the way we want them to or not. And there are circumstances that are beyond our control a lot of times.
And there are a lot of outside forces. And that one we read in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. We know that that's not a guarantee. There are a lot of situations where a child has grown up in a certain family situation, and then after they leave, they end up in a whole different place.
Right.
And it's not the fault of the parents. It's the fault of other influences that came along after that. But the opposite is, if you don't train up a child in the way that he or she should go, you're less likely to have the right kind of outcome than if you do.
Right.
And so we just want everybody to understand that these are not foolproof, and they're the pun is that it talks about fools in the book of Proverbs, but they're not foolproof, but it's your best shot. If you want a good result, this is the best way to go about it.
That's right.
Another type of proverb is parabolic, and we should have had you describe this because it's a math term.
So was the last one, integral.
Integral, integral is a math term. Parabolic is a math term.
Yeah. Well, parabolas are symmetrical. They are mirror images of one another. So as you look at parabolic proverbs, you have a two-part statement that mirrors itself.
And in a sense, it's also similar to parables. And we know that a parable means to cast alongside, and so a parabola, in a sense, is an image that mirrors the other side, is cast alongside the other, and that's what a parable is. You have one half, and then you have the other half, and that's what these parabolic proverbs are. The first line of the proverb illustrates the second. The second line is the teaching, but the first one is an analogy. In Proverbs 11:22, as a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion. There's the parable. You think about a ring of gold in a swine's snout, but the point is that's exactly what a beautiful woman who lacks discretion is like. Like cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a distant land in Proverbs 25:25. In the next chapter, Proverbs 26, verse 1, like snow in summer and like rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. That's a pretty easy one for farmers to understand when they're getting ready to harvest and rain comes along.
Yep.
That's about the same as honor for a fool. And then in the next Proverbs 27, verse 15, it says, a constant dripping on a day of steady rain and the contentious woman are alike. And we're not going to touch that one.
Nope.
Another type of proverb is comparative, where the first line expresses something better than the second. The key word in a comparative proverb is the word better. Proverbs 15:16, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil with it. The next verse says, better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. Proverbs 17:1, better is a dry morsel and quietness with it than a house full of feasting with strife. And I might just mention here, as we see these two consecutive verses, there are some chapters that are almost all the same type of proverb. And we've just picked out individual proverbs, but there are some chapters that are pretty much all the same type of proverb. One more way we looked at the proverbs was some of the characters, the abstract characters that are created in the book of Proverbs. And this is more the approach that we're going to take as we go back and look at the individual proverbs. We're going to see what the proverbs say about the wise and about the foolish and about the naive. And we'll also look at what the proverbs have to say about money in different categories. And this is more along the line of what we're going to do as we take a look at the proverbs. But Justin Taylor came up with some suggestions with some characters in the gospelcoalition.org. The first group that's addressed in the book of Proverbs is the wise. And by wise, it indicates someone who embraces God's covenant and learns the skill of living out the covenant in everyday situations. And that's a wonderful description, a wonderful definition of someone who is wise. It gets into not only knowing what God wants, but understanding what God wants, and then applying it to your life in an everyday situation. One example is Proverbs 2:2. Make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. In Proverbs 9:8, do not reprove a scoffer lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. Proverbs 10:1, the Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. That last one is a combination of the character of a wise and the character of a fool. So many of the Psalms deal with the fool, just as they deal with the wise, they deal with the fool. The book of Proverbs would define a fool as someone who is opposed to God's covenant. Instead of understanding God's covenant and putting it into practice in their lives, they oppose it. Mm-hmm. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Proverbs 10:1, it says the Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. He who walks with wise men will be wise, Proverbs 13:20 says, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Proverbs 14:9, fools mock at sin, but among the upright there is goodwill. Just as the wise is a common character in the book of Proverbs, so is the fool. The simple is someone who is just floating around. They're not firmly committed to wisdom, or they're not committed to folly or foolishness. And they are the people who are easily misled, can be swayed from one way to another. The sad implication might be that a good number of people are going to find themselves in this category. Mm-hmm. They're neither wise nor fools, some of both, but they're just too easily swayed. Proverbs 14:15 describes the naive or the simple as someone who believes everything, but the prudent man considers his steps. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's why it's more convenient to be naive. It takes some effort to be prudent because you have to stop and think about what you're doing. The naive just takes whatever comes along.
Right. And I think maybe that's the distinction among each of those three groups. The fool works at defying God. The wise works at honoring God, and the simple just kind of takes life as it comes and doesn't really give any thought to God at all.
Right.
And so you're right. There are a lot of people who give lip service to God and say they want to be Christians or say they want to follow God, but really don't give much thought to it in a day-to-day living aspect. And it shows in the way that they live their lives.
And it's not quite totally related, but it reminds me of something I heard this week. Is if you're going to believe everything you read the Bible.
There you go. I like it.
There's so much fake news going around.
Yeah.
That if you're going to believe everything that you're going to read the Bible.
I like it.
That kind of fits in with this idea of the simple or the naive. A lot of people believing everything they read. It'd be better if they'd read the Bible, and if they're going to believe everything, let's.
I like it.
So. Here's another character, the co-referential characters from different positive angles. I'm going to let you describe this one.
This is where we need to start taking notes for the test later.
Exactly.
I think, there's some big words here, but it really breaks down to this. We're going to use some words that describe the same people, but just from different perspectives.
Okay, for example.
For example, when we talk about the wise, there are some other names that are used that are attributed to the same people, but just have a different little context or a little different perspective. So the righteous are the wise, same people, but righteous is one who has embraced the covenant, seen from the perspective of his faithfulness to God's will. So righteous kind of has that key word of faithfulness. And when we look at a wise person's life, the aspects of their life that point at faithfulness, we're going to call that righteousness.
Okay.
And then we have the wise, same people, same person, seen from the perspective of his skill in living out God's will. So there's a skillful living of God's will. And we're going to look at kind of nitpick their life, kind of take it apart, look at the details of their life and see how skillfully they follow God's covenant. And that's going to speak to their wisdom.
And that gets back to where we were talking about before, where it's not just knowing it, but applying it to your everyday life situations.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we also have a third category there, the prudent, same people, same as the righteous, same as the wise. But this is the individual who is seen as one who carefully plans out his obedience. So the prudent has a plan.
Okay.
And they have a methodical, purposeful way in which they're going to pursue God's covenant. And so we have just a little different context, a little different perspective for each of those three, even though they are the same person. We don't have to choose we don't have to choose between righteousness and wisdom.
Okay.
We want to be both.
So if you're one, you're probably the other.
Right.
Is there a negative correspondence?
No, there is. There is a co-referential characters for different negative angles. So,
Okay.
so that just means same people, but we're going to look at it from a different perspective. So we have the wicked. That's one who rejects God's covenant, seen from the angle of his opposition to God. One who stands there with his fist, shaking his fist at God, saying, I don't care what you say, I'm going to live the way I want to live. Mm-hmm. And that's wickedness. We're going to call that person wicked. Same person is a fool. And from that perspective, seen from the angle of the stupid course of life he has chosen. And we talked about that word, whether or not we were going to leave it in there, but we liked it.
Yeah.
And it's there for a purpose.
In this case, it makes a point.
It does make a point. And you know, I've heard different definitions of maybe the word, a definition for the word idiot is somebody who does the same thing over and over and expects different results. Mm-hmm. And if you're living your life in a way that doesn't get you the results you want, and you keep making the same decisions over and over and over again, well, then the Bible has a word for that. It's called a fool. Mm-hmm. And if you want a certain outcome, you need to live in a way that gives you the best possibility of getting that outcome. And if you're getting an outcome you don't like, try changing the way you live. That the Bible lays that out pretty clearly.
What are some other types of characters we're into?
There are some gradations of negative characters, and that just means there's a hierarchy of the foolish, a hierarchy of the negative characters as they're presented in the book of Proverbs. So we have one that would be the proud or the haughty, the scoffer is another. Those words all kind of describe the same person in Proverbs 21:24. Proud, haughty, scoffer are his names, who acts with insolent pride, and that's not good. You don't want to be that person. That person is rated lower than a fool. A fool, once you get into the proud and haughty, then you've taken that foolishness to a new level, and you're reveling in that foolishness, and you're declaring that foolishness to be wisdom. And so we don't want to end up there. Proverbs 26 verse 12 kind of follows along with that. Do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. There's that idea of being haughty, being wise in your own eyes, being proud of the decisions that you've made, and saying, I've made these decisions and it's gotten me to this point in life, and I'm just going to stick with it because I think I know more than God does. Not a good place to be.
No, somebody who's absolutely totally wrong, but he doesn't know he isn't.
Right.
He thinks he's right.
Right. And so there's that gradation where you start out with those who are simple or naive, and there's still some hope for them. If they can learn to see life from the proper perspective, then they can become wise. Then you get to the fool, and they're a little more further gone, and then you get to the proud and the arrogant, and that's about as far gone as you can get.
And that's probably just a version of fool that's gone past just simple foolishness.
Right.
Do we have any questions to share with the people?
Of course we do. We always want to review and reflect a little bit.
Okay.
So, what is a proverb?
That's a really good question. What is a proverb, especially in the scriptural sense?
Right.
The proverbs we find in the Bible, what are they?
Yeah. What is the purpose of the proverbs?
Boy, I hope they don't go back to chapter 1, the first 7 verses, and find the answer to that.
Is that cheating?
That would be cheating. It would be cheating to go back to Proverbs 1 through 7, and find the purpose of the proverbs.
We'll overlook it this once.
Okay. Not again.
What are some different ways that the Proverbs make their points?
And there are so many good ways that the Proverbs make their points.
Right. And it's okay to rewind if you want to go back and look at some of that.
You can always watch this again, and you can go to the website and download the guide, the study discussion guide that goes along with it.
That's right.
It's about 4 pages long, but hey, it's there. We
It's
tried
all there.
We tried to include everything you might need.
Right. And then, who are the positive and negative characters represented in the Proverbs?
Excellent questions. And I hope people go and get to download the discussion guide and answer those questions, think about those questions. So what are we going to do next week?
Next week, we're going to take a special look at a couple of characters in chapters 1 through 9. There's some divisions in the book of Proverbs, and one division occurs from chapters 1 through 9 is more of a narrative approach to presenting some Proverbs. Mm-hmm. And then as you get into chapters 10 through 31, then you really just have collections of those pithy little statements that Proverbs are, and with less narrative material in there. So we're going to look at Proverbs 1 through 9, and we're going to look specifically at Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom.
Can they go ahead and start looking at those, or should they wait?
It'd probably be all right if they went ahead and read. Especially, I'd say chapters 7 and 8 and 9 are pretty key to that discussion.
I didn't know if it was okay for them to go ahead and read those, or they had to wait until we told them what they said.
If you want the Cliff Notes versions, just 7, 8, 9. If you want to know the full material 1 through 9,
that'd be a lot of reading. That'd be almost a whole chapter per day.
Almost, yeah.
That I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe some of them will do that.
Maybe so.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here this evening.
It's been fun.
It's good to see you, and I look forward to seeing you all sorts of times. It was good seeing you this morning when we got together finally.
Finally.
And it's just great. So I look forward to next week and everything in between.
Very much.
Okay. See you later.
See you later.
Bye-bye.